Hello, and welcome on the Pacifist Barricade. My name is Maria Cernat, and I'm producing this podcast to spread the message of peace. It is with great pleasure that I invited today Pascal Lottaz, professor at Kyoto University, and also the producer of one of the most important podcasts, Analyzing International Affairs. Welcome to our show.
Hello, Maria, and thank you for the invitation.
I'm speaking to Pascal because I think neutrality is very important. And in Romania, once the war in Ukraine started, a lot of discussions were taking place, and a lot of people expressed their doubt in the alliance, but not only in the alliance, but the idea of being very obedient toward what NATO says. Unfortunately, their voices were marginalized, and what appeared to be the common sense consensus in Romania was the idea that once we sign the agreement with NATO, then we have obligations, and discussions about neutrality should be silenced altogether. But I have two questions. If you're in an alliance, should we not also contemplate getting out of the alliance and discussing neutrality? And second, we have Hungary, an even smaller country in Eastern Europe. And even though they are in the alliance, in the NATO alliance, they do not follow by the book everything the alliance says. So, should we follow this path of total obedience, or should we look to Hungary, or should we open the debate on neutrality altogether? What do you think?
Thank you for these questions. And look, my channel and my research is called Neutrality Studies because I want to understand how neutrality works. But on the other hand, I myself am not a neutral advocate of uh, of of politics in world affairs. And I very much have opinions, and one of them is that I think neutrality is a very helpful tool and could be even more helpful in the future. So I consider myself a neutralist. I try to advocate for neutrality, all over the place, actually. So whatever I say, you must understand it with that background, right? I'm not neutral on the neutrality question. But one of the things that I believe to have understood is that neutrality usually is kind of a default fallback for states that have only worse options to choose from, right? So, of course, you can join an alliance and then hope that you're safe within that. But this strategy, time and again, has failed. I mean, in the First World War, countries were ganging up in alliances, and in the end, it was a shot crown prince of the Habsburg monarchy in Sarajevo that caused a chain reaction that then drew so many states into a very, very destructive and disruptive conflict. And we've seen such alliances, leading to wars more than once. And depending on how your viewers and listeners interpret the current escalation with Russia, I mean, we see how the failure of neutrality, or how the failure of Europe to actually accept a neutral Ukraine and have Ukraine as a bridge between Russia and the EU, a neutral bridge. Um, like, instead of having that, militarizing it to the teeth and using it as a proxy in a proxy war against Russia, how that is horribly, horribly destructive, not only to Ukraine, but to the entirety of Europe. And, in Romania, you're very close to all of this. I know that people get very, very emotional about it, but seriously, we must contemplate what happened here. It is the failure of the neutrality of Ukraine from really being supported by the international community that, in the end, in my view, led to the tragedy that we have. The Russians, time and again, including now, have been saying, Ukraine must be neutral for for the benefit of all of us, because the Russians cannot accept being threatened right there at the not just at their doorstep. The doorstep is the wrong place to understand it, but through Ukraine, it's just too dangerous a border. The border with the Latvian states and with Finland can be managed because it has been managed for the longest time, but Ukraine is a dagger pointed at the heart of Russia. So if we take that and say like, okay, we have this neutrality tool as a potential international relations fallback to kind of create a security structure. And Jeffrey Sachs speaks about spheres of security, not spheres of interest, but spheres of common and shared security, where you have borderlands that naturally must remain neither here nor there, but connected with everybody in order to create a little bit of stability. Now, this is, I would say, realist kind of common sense. On the other hand, we also have realist analysis that tells us that's just not how great powers behave. They will push and push and push until they hit the wall. And that is especially the analysis of John Mearsheimer. But the people like him also argue that security competition is unavoidable. War is avoidable, because war is basically the escalation into a very unhealthy state out of what is healthy, which is security competition, or what is unavoidable. Security competition is unavoidable, but it doesn't necessarily need to lead to war. What we have done over the past 70 years or so is we didn't develop this tool of neutrality anymore. It used to be a very important part of international law. It still is a part of international law, but the way that it is codified has really very much been stagnant. It has been developed through especially state practice of smaller countries like Switzerland, Austria, Costa Rica, but the perception of this being a tool of great power politics, and being something that, for instance, the United Nations could support, has been lacking for a long time. I must add that thanks to Turkmenistan, we since 2017 have the International United Nations Day of Neutrality on the 12th of December, because Turkmenistan too is a neutral, became neutral after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and has been pushing for neutrality ever since, but that hasn't gained a lot of attention, I would say. What's happening now is that since NATO ran against his wall, which is Russia, and Russia is even pushing back, the stress on NATO is tremendous. And I think countries like Romania must be feeling that stress very much. The stress is even increasing because the only threat to your EU territory is now emanating not from Russia, but from the United States. The only country, the only great power that has said that it wants a piece of the land of Europe is the United States. So NATO is really in an existential crisis. If the US continues this path, I mean the the incentives on NATO members to actually withdraw from NATO and say like we cannot continue in this framework because it's being used now, even to the point where our territory is under threat, is going to be very large. I have no doubt that the obedience of the Europeans is going to be tremendous, and they're going to try to put so much lipstick on this pick that it is somehow acceptable. But I really wonder if the US actually goes through with this, if this is going to be possible. I mean, this might very well be a death blow to NATO, and if that happens, Maria, what is the alternative for Romania? Of course, everybody can huddle together under the EU framework of the common foreign and security policy and build that into a military alliance, but that's going to take a very, very long time. I really recommend that states like Romania, states like Moldova already is on paper neutral, but would need to enforce that. Although Moldova is also not part of the EU, but let's leave that aside. I mean that especially these liminal states that are close to the centers of power, that they seriously think about a neutrality strategy. An alliance strategy is built on the idea: let's be together as scary as possible and do deterrence. Let's make sure the other one is scared. A neutrality strategy works in a different way. It tries to say like, let's try to make sure everybody likes me. If people in Brussels like me, and in Moscow like me, and in Washington like me, well, then I do not need to fear them because they already get everything from me that they want. This is a very difficult position, and it's a constant position of negotiation. And of course, you can never be perfect friends with everybody, but the basic thinking is like changing from try to deter everyone into trying to accommodate everybody. Again, this is very hard, and countries also in the Cold War had to be very careful. Finland. Finland is a prime example of a country that really managed very well in a very hostile environment to kind of remain on the good side, more or less good side of all parties, and thereby maintain strategic autonomy and I call it wiggle room in international relations. I believe that Romania is a country that could think about that, although the problems to Romania are huge because currently it has one of the largest bases of NATO on its territory. And even if NATO dissolves, this base would remain, and the successor states would immediately try to think about what to do with it and how to bring it into whatever other kind of arrangement there is. So the historical trajectory for Romania to get out of the alliance, even if it breaks up, is not the easiest. But I very much recommend thinking about it as one of the options to create security for Romania.
But who's gonna make this decision? Because as you discussed with one of the most important researchers on what you call the security status, I think you call it securitocracy or something like that. Well, I think in Romania is even more developed than in the West. I think you're experiencing now in Germany what and the Western Europe is experiencing now what in Romania was on something, a reality. Romania has a long tradition with the security apparatus, and even during the socialist regime, Ceausescu's regime, the security apparatus was very powerful. So we have a long tradition. And unfortunately, now you have the secret services that act like um, the council in Iran that does some sort of vetting, but secretly, of the candidates. So it's very difficult to see in mainstream politics candidates that were not already vetted by the security apparatus. And the security apparatus is all pro war and pro escalation and pro buying weapons from the United States. So, what is the solution? Because I really don't see any. And I don't see how Romania is going to become relevant because this is also my position. We have to become relevant and not the most obedient member of NATO. How do we do? How do we make this change? I think this is the main problem now.
Europe is at a point where the institutional integration into NATO has been going on for Western Europe for the past 70 years, and for Eastern Europe for the last 25, 30 years, right? I mean, the work on this and the elite structures in place in Berlin, but also in all of the Eastern European capitals are such that they got most of their education in the West, and they have their investments in the West, and we have these clubs of buddies, right? And plus you've had as you just said, the security services that cooperate with each other and then even vet the political process, which is very scary. It's extremely scary. So we've already moved away quite a bit from the ideal of a properly open and democratic society where people are not pre-selected by a small group of elites, but that's where we are. However, the thing is that Donald Trump is currently doing his utmost to break apart the very structures that are serving this kind of structural dominance, right, over Europe. I am pretty convinced that he's not aware that he's doing that. I'm pretty convinced that his circle of people is not aware of that. This is probably the machinations of a failing and falling empire. But the fact to me is that they're undermining this entire alliance structure, which builds around creating allegiance through these fostering of these elite networks, through the joint decision making in NATO, through the fact that the NATO headquarters is next to the EU headquarter, and that the same people, the same kind of ambassadors and top personnel are mingling here and mingling there, and all of that seems to be becoming a part, which I do think must throw, even in Romania, the securitocracy or the security establishment into quite a bit of disarray. So, in a normal situation, I would say that the chances of Romania ever breaking free from this are pretty low. But the thing is that the top dog is currently throwing away its its tools of control. And Romania has experienced this before, right? Romania wouldn't be where it is if Gorbachev had taken other decisions, if the Russians hadn't, if it wasn't for Russia that actually said we're done with this, we don't want it anymore, and nationalism and Yeltsin and so on actually destroyed the levers of power that first went into the other republics, but secondarily into the what we still call satellites, right? Like Romania. And Romania was never a a very obedient satellite, actually. I mean, Ceausescu had relatively a lot of freedom of action to do what he wanted, and he did actually, and he did have a foreign policy that was not always aligned with the Soviet center. But the mechanisms through which he held power and his minions and his security state were directly integrated with the center. So once the center changed, well, Romania had to change. Actually, Ceausescu was the last one to realize it. And because he was the last one, he was dead 3 days later. That's how it can go, right? It's a European example of how fast this can break apart. So, and I think we are seeing something similar, if not precisely similar, but it is the center of the current power that's throwing everything on the floor. So I would hope that the securitocracy and the security state in Romania will have enough brains to not repeat the experience of 89. Because again, it's not much fun to stand in front of a firing squad. I do not know if they have the brains to do that, but I would guess that things are heating up to a point now where they need to get a little bit more careful. And if they listen to your podcast, I would tell them one of the options to look at is actually neutrality. You don't need to wonder like, into whose arms am I going to throw myself now? You can wonder of how to create an environment where everybody wants to cooperate with you a little bit and thereby maintain some sort of independence. And it doesn't matter whether you are a perfect democracy or a dictatorship like Turkmenistan. It works for both cases. So, dear securitocracy in Romania, please think about it for the sake of yourself and of the country that you're running.
At the same time, you mentioned Ceausescu, and looking at the international stage, this is not my specialty. I teach different things, but since the war started, I became very interested. I mean, I think a lot of students will come to international affairs departments due to the current situation. I don't know whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, but nevertheless, I'm looking and I'm seeing something like this. You're either in an alliance like us and you accept the dominance of the United States, basically, and Western powers. Um, until recently, they worked together and they seem to be a very coherent alliance. Or if you want to break free, then you have to accept a leader like Erdogan, Putin, Xi Jinping, a powerful leader that is going against the interest of the hegemon, so to speak. So it's very difficult to find room for democracy, and I'm referring now to the book of Lindsay O'Rourke, who studied like regime change operations during the Cold War, and in her meta-analysis of the type of government that is able to resist this influence from the United States, she found out that the governments led by authoritarian personalities are best suited to gain some independence, sovereignty, and autonomy. So, is there really room for neutrality, democracy, and independence in this context? Because if you have somebody that stays at the door with a big gun, then you either succumb to their wishes or you try to forge a security and internal security apparatus able to withstand this type of pressure. So you either have an internal dictator or authoritarian personality, or you have the dominance of the United States.
I don't think they necessarily go together. Again, like also neutrality itself, you don't it doesn't matter whether you're a dictatorship or a democracy. It works for both cases. The question of the, external pressures is not necessarily, I would say, correlated to the way that the state itself runs. The thing that with the thing is that neutrality always has the most chances to come to fruition in a balance of power or in a multipolar environment, because that's the point where the neutrals can convincingly try to make the argument to both sides. Look, you better let us be on our own, and we will fulfill our purpose. We will do what is best for you. And you tell that the Russians, I mean, take Finland. Finland told the Russians, look, we understand we are your northwestern flank, and we have an international treaty with you that makes sure that if somebody attacks you through Finland, we will help you. And we're fine. We will do that. But we don't want to be part of the Warsaw Pact, but we will make sure that your flank remains safe. At the same time, they looked at the West and said, like, we're gonna implement your economic structures, and we're gonna cooperate with you, and we're gonna make sure that you will never want to attack the Soviets through our territory, thereby fulfilling the security function for the Soviet Union, which was what they wanted. And on the other hand, they got economic integration with the West, which is something that the Soviet Union didn't like very much, but it was willing to take it as long as it wasn't directed against them. So, and we've several examples in history where this worked for a good period of time. Switzerland, basically 150 years, was able to signal to all sides, look, we will make sure these mountain passes stay out of the direct control of anyone there, but therefore we secure everybody else. And you get stress. Of course you do. You will get threats because somebody wants to control you. But those are the moments when the neutral states do have to have some form of security strategy. And I know you're a pacifist, but I just must emphasize neutrality itself is not a pacifist concept. It's actually a concept of self-reliance, also in military purposes. Its neutrals are usually not a threat to small neutrals are usually not a threat to others, but they can play with that. They can use it as saying, like, look, we have a minimal capacity to defend our borders. And as long as nobody comes here to try to take this plot of land, we will fulfill that function, and we will secure you against the other one. Again, take Ukraine. If Ukraine had been neutral and convincingly told the Russians, look, nobody will ever attack you through here, we will make sure that won't happen. At the same time, near Europe, no, the Russians will never attack you through our borders because we will put up a fierce defense, just as we're doing right now. That would fulfill, at least on paper, the security rationale on both sides. The problem with Ukraine we had is that one side wasn't satisfied with that and said, "I want more. I want to use you as a battering ramp against Russia, and therefore you have to bleed." And that's ultimately what happened. But this is a failure of Ukraine to defend that neutrality. And Viktor Yanukovych was not pro-Russian. He was a neutralist. He wanted a neutral Ukraine, and it was the failure of Yanukovych to defend that neutrality that led in the end to the tragedy that we're seeing. And I don't want to blame him. It's just like had it maintained, had he been able to maintain that position, had he not been couped out of office, the chances that this war didn't come about the way that we saw it are, in my view, quite high. So this is just a long way to say that no, I do believe that there are very good reasons why neutral states can thrive in an environment, especially the environment that we're going to see now. Again, the question is whether the people and the forces in power actually do want to go such a way. And it's sometimes not even up to the leader of the country, like Mr. Yanukovych. If you don't have control over your different parts of the state, then you might very well end up in at the shorter end of the stick. The problem, of course, we have is that the Europeans now for 30 years or more have stopped thinking about the national good in the national sense, right? Everything is thought about within the larger structure of the European Union and NATO. And that's not very conducive to the idea that let's keep our national borders safe and let's use a neutrality strategy. However, I think at the moment the future is so open that we could even imagine that the European Union at some point will say, like, you know what, maybe we just need to be a large neutral buffer between the Americans and the Russians because like we are too
Yes,
weak
yes,
to
this is
assert
exactly
ourselves.
what I was about to ask you because I think for Romania, given the fact that our elites are very obedient, I mean, I think this is the perfect word to characterize the intellectual elites, journalists, politicians, the security apparatus. So my hopes are very low. But I was thinking about Europe because maybe there's a chance. I mean, we are not fortune tellers, but I'm thinking that maybe there's a chance that they realize since they are not competitive technologically, since their military is not competitive, since we don't, we don't, as Europeans, I don't think we can compete with the United States or Russia in terms of the military power. Maybe we can act as a buffer zone and a neutral space. Do you think
Yeah,
that?
yes, that would make a lot of sense. The thing is, I mean, the Europeans right now, they keep saying like, oh, the Russians are going to invade us and whatnot. It's like, why? What would the Russians want? What the hell would they want from Europe? Like a failing economy, like an aging population. What would they want? I mean, apart from like very pretty buildings and old cobblestones and so on, what has Europe much to offer? So in a sense, it's even the whole industrial capacity of the continent is really very low. So if you lose now the United States as the big protector in the back, if you even then don't get to procure a lot of these weapons anymore from the US, let's say that we go that far with the if the dispute gets that high, I mean Europe will kind of be forced to be neutral because there's nowhere to go, right? I mean, they seriously will be forced to basically say like, okay, the best thing we can do is to try to secure our borders with the military and the police forces that we've got, and then we need to signal to everybody, okay, let's stop it, and they will be forced to stop this escalatory nonsense toward Russia. Um, unless the ideological Russophobia is so high that they are actually willing to basically without having any military force at all still go into a war with the Russians. I mean, but at some point I would say at least once the if the United States actually walks away and shatters NATO by taking Greenland or whatnot. If that happens, I think at some point the realization must be there that Europe is alone, even in the minds of these people. Um, and then, in a sense, neutrality is the only fallback option you have. You can create an alliance under your amongst yourselves, but as long as you're that weak, you're forced to basically say like, fine, I'll just mind my own business, which is what the Europeans should be doing anyhow. They shouldn't be doing anything else. It's like, God damn it, our continent is nice enough. Let's just make it pretty, okay? We don't need to dominate the others like we did over 500 years. But again, old habits die hard. Just look at the way the EU is treating the African continent. It's still basically like looking at it as a neo-colonial, well, semi-possession that you talk down to, right? But once if that changes, if we manage to actually get our act together, I think we could build something very pretty and actually a security structure inside the whole of Europe, including Russia, which the Russians have been telling us for the last 30 years that they want to build. So all it would take is to kind of like take that and then play a neutral role. And there we would have a structure. And we even have the organization, like the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, that could, in theory, it's still there. It's like brain dead at the moment, or it's like it's incapacitated at the moment. But it could be revived and it could be a proper security structure if the Europeans were just willing to go that route.
What do you make of the declaration Merz gave with regards to Russia? He said that we should understand that Russia is a European country. I think this is a very sudden change of tune coming from Merz, who was all about escalation, war in Ukraine, deterrence, and all the rest. So, what do you make of it? Do you think reality starts to hit? I mean, these people are slowly waking up to things that were so obvious years ago.
I think so. I mean, that's the thing about losing a war. Losing a war is very, very hurtful, but it's mainly hurtful to the people who pretended that they were winning because reality asserts itself. And they were pretending that they were winning until a couple of months ago. They were like going, just like one more month and Russia will collapse. And all of this is coming to haunt them. And of course, they will find ways to sweet talk this and say, like, no, no, we always said that, blah, blah. But it does hurt. It does hurt. And this is the kind of shock, I think, of this assertion of reality and the realization that reality is different from the way that they try to talk it about, that might do the trick. I hope it will. Because again, the only other option is actually to go even further into fantasy land, which might be the idea that, well, then Europe can do it alone. German, British, French contingents into Ukraine, and then we storm Moscow. I hope these people are not that dumb. It's just the last 4 years don't give me much hope that there's no people who think like that. But maybe it's just, the ones who tend to be the most realists in this tend to be the military people because they're the ones asked to go and die for this BS. And I do think that slowly but surely the military's people are getting nervous in Europe, saying like, okay, we don't have a backstop. We are losing the Americans. We might have to fight against them. I mean, the Germans deployed German troops to Greenland that they immediately had to recall, but they did. It's like realizing that if the Americans in the American barricades, which are already in Greenland, if they decide to just step out and march up and take a building or two, they could do that. I mean, the realization that that's on the cards, I think it's going to do something. And even if it's not happening over the next couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months or years will do to change the strategic thinking of that securitocracy that we talked about.
At the same time, you know that is paradoxical. We have so much information and we have the security apparatus and we have these leaders who are supposed to be so informed. And I'm shocked to see how detached from reality they are. I think this is a unique moment in history, in international relations, where you have so much information and at the same time, elites so detached from reality. You even get conspiratorial. I mean, is somebody trying to use them? Because it seems so, I don't know. I am a person from a small village in Romania, and these ideas that we are winning the war against Russia seems so crazy to begin with. But you have Kaya Kalas. I think she wholeheartedly, I think she's a true believer. She's not a cynical character. I
Yeah.
think she truly believes what she says. I mean, and she's in a position where she has access to way more information that I do from a small village in Romania near Bucharest. How is it possible that these people became so intoxicated with their own propaganda?
I think that's it. They got intoxicated with their own propaganda, and again, I don't think this is even very unique. Actually, Romania is such an example. I mean, I suppose I would guess that your parents or maybe grandparents back in 88 or 89 could have told you that they felt that things are not going right. And why does Ceausescu not realize this? Because he must have access to all of this information. But at a certain level, especially once you create a media narrative about yourself and about how glorious you are, and that's what they've been doing. I mean, the bubble just gets very, very, protective of these people, right? And it inhibits probably their ability to properly assess the situation, even with that kind of information. Again, because if there's something you don't want to hear, right, then people might be hesitant to actually tell you. And this is it's a loop that then feeds itself. I really think Ceausescu is a very, very good example of that, of how that can work. And we have similar processes, sociological processes at the moment at work in Brussels. They are shielding themselves from a serious assessment, and even the ones who understand it know that if I provide that assessment, my position might get axed. So let's not go there if we don't have to, or otherwise, differently, let's leech on these positions as long as we can, right? Because they're also very lucrative. So you have all kinds of incentive structures that lead to Fantasyland. And because things have been going fine for them, because they've been so protected, Fantasyland didn't lead to these outcomes like in other places. If under Stalin you were a military general who lived in Fantasyland and didn't deliver, then you would be yourself shot and taken out of the system. Right now, this is something the European system doesn't do. It takes forward its useless and mistaken accounts until ultimate collapse comes, right? Same happened with Hitler, right? The Germans, they kept, I mean, Hitler kept believing that he can get out of this one way or another until he was taken out by reality. So it's unfortunately it seems to be the sociology of conflict that once the sides harden, one of them might go into fantasy land even more until stuff breaks apart. So the question is, will reality be able to assert itself and lead to a correction of behavior soon enough, or will it go to complete self-destruction? If Merz now starts talking about, well, Russia's European power, and if they start like changing tune, it seems to indicate that they don't want to go to the bunker and have to shoot themselves, but that that actually something is now changing within that group, which would be a hopeful interpretation of what's going on.
Well, let's hope so. I listened to an analysis by Alexander Mercuris, and he said that it would be impossible for the future of the European Union to admit Russia into it because it's such a big country and it would dwarf everybody else and it will tend to impose its will. So, the way things are organized now at the European level, it would be impossible to integrate it. But he was suggesting some sort of a parallel structure that is more loosely organized and that would also be more relaxed in terms of regulations, and that would make possible for Russia to join. Because I think it's very important to have negotiations and discussions with Russia and Europe. That was something really crazy that we stopped all discussions with Russia except for Orban. I don't know of any leader who reached out. And do you see this parallel organization that would be more loose and then keep the European Union, but then form a parallel organization when Russia is also a member of?
Yes, I mean, you don't need to integrate Russia into the EU. I don't think Russia would want to join the EU. At this point, I don't even think Turkey still wants to join the EU. It looks like more than like a liability than a promise. The one thing that the EU still has going for it is that at its core, it's an economic union. And if it goes back to that, if it abandons the globalist kind of supranational state idea with like integrating all of the states and being a super state, if it abandons that and goes back to the idea, let's just be a well-functioning economic union of 400 plus million people and thrive on trade and on common standards, then I think the EU would have a lot to offer to Russia and Turkey and others to say like, okay, we don't necessarily want you to join, but we can do free trade agreements. We can do, just like the European Union used to do bilateral agreements with Switzerland in order to tackle sector by sector, including, academia, including electricity, energy, and so on. You can do individual treaties and then increase the common structure and infrastructure that you use and that you build. That would be absolutely thinkable, and that would actually be, in my view, a good way forward. And again, you could use the Organization for Cooperation and Security in Europe for a common security framework to say like, look, these are the rules, these are the mechanisms, and then we try to organize exchanges, civil to civil, even military to military, in order to do confidence building measures, in order that we don't just have to trust. We also do like Scott Ritters. We exchange observers to each other in order to look at our nuclear programs, because let's not forget the Brits and the French still do have nuclear weapons programs. Let's manage those, and let's create these vessels, right? That we can like topic by topic, or like as they used to say, basket by basket work. And that could be very beneficial, right? I mean, you could think about a security structure that extends all the way to China, so that you have trade routes. So the Chinese, with their One Belt, One Road initiative, they would be the happiest ever to say, like, finally we can build these trade routes and trade all the way from, like, Vladivostok, Beijing, to Portugal, and increase energy security and whatnot. Um, on mutually beneficial terms. And you don't need to integrate everything into one structure. I think that would be a mistake. But to create the different institutions or build them up, we don't even need to reinvent the wheel. That's the amazing thing, right? A lot of things have been done, and useful things, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s that we can work with. The only thing that we need to abandon is this idea of having to dominate the other one. You need to let the Russians be Russians and run Russia the way Russia runs, and stop this idea that you have to intervene everywhere. I mean, just like with Iran, we saw it again, right? As soon as there were these protests, as soon as whatever the CIA meddled down there, the Europeans were like, we need to stand behind Iran, and the Ayatollahs must go and whatnot. It's like, stop it, just shut up, just let these countries manage their own affairs. You shut up, and then you just ask everybody else, what would you like to participate in? Europe as an offer, not as a dictate. And I think that could work very well and would actually be well positioned to do that. It's so in this sense, my frustration comes from seeing all of the potential that there is, and how we Europeans stand in our own way of getting to a de-escalatory kind of 1990s moment that we could really use right now.
Yes, I completely agree. But I think, do you think this chaos that Donald Trump is creating right now is also a ray of hope, since you said that he's basically destroying the power centers and he's destroying mechanisms that were in place for many years? And probably not realizing it, he is doing a lot of damage to all these power structures that held us hostage to this very belligerent mentality. So, do you think there's a ray of hope in what he's doing?
Actually, I think so. Not in the way that I think he does it for the good of the planet or so on, but that again, the shock that he creates now might be just enough to wake up the Europeans. The it's really bizarre that he goes this far with this idea of kind of expanding the United States, because there's not I see the logic to it, yes, but this is unneeded, right? In a sense, okay, you win Greenland, you lose Europe. And maybe that's even what he wants, right? Get Greenland and then cut the cord to the Europeans. Um, Although I must say the interpretation of Brian Berletic still is that it is all just part of the plan of doing division of labor, of dumping Ukraine on the Europeans and have the Europeans fight Russia while the Americans then refocus on fighting China. That is also still on the cards. But again, if that was the goal, then really like threatening Greenland and maybe even like invading it or whatnot is basically the opposite of what you need to do in order to kind of keep the Europeans online. I mean, that's like one step too far. I think even under Brian Beletic's interpretation of what's going on, it's hard to argue that this is just a way to incentivize the Europeans to serve harder, because okay, maybe they're gonna serve even harder. Maybe this is just a the ultimate way how the master disciplines the dog by taking away even a very big bone, right? And then beating it until it completely succumbs to the will of the master. Maybe that's what's going on, but it's hard for me to interpret it like that because again, in the current media narrative and framework in Europe, it just doesn't fit. It just doesn't go in there. It creates all of the animosity toward the United States that you really can't use when you want to abuse a minion, a satellite state, right? So in a sense, I do think that maybe in the end this is going to be beneficial for a peaceful Europe by by really proving that the previous model of complete security integration with the US has led to more violence than peace. Again, if we remain optimists, then maybe there's something good going to come out of this.
I'm very happy that you came because I think you're one of the most suitable person to answer this question. What bothered me right from the beginning of the war in Ukraine was the use of feminism, LGBT rights, and the progressive agenda to support the idea that the left, the youngsters, the progressive thinkers should align with the West because they are the only ones defending minorities, sexual minorities, women's rights, and so on and so forth. And I think this is an egregious instrumentalization of the progressive agenda by the West.
It's
And I'm very curious to know what you think about it because even now in Iran, right? If you are not pro bombing Iran, you support an authoritarian religious regime. And the idea is okay, so you care about the LGBT community in Iran. You care about women's rights. What's your solution? Bombing them and killing them? I mean, that's so
it's
absurd.
it's it's
And
it's utter gaslighting. It's complete gaslighting. And you probably know I'm gay. Any gay falling for this stupidity is a dumb idiot, just like the others. I mean, you cannot bring gay rights with bombs. That's just the height of insanity. I wish every gay person on the planet nothing but the best, but I will never ever drop bombs on their heads in order to further their rights in their countries. I mean, no, this is just no. It must stop there. We cannot go and bomb people into accepting our way of organizing our societies. And again, it took centuries in the West for the gays to actually have the status that they have today, and it was a very very long struggle. Would you argue that we need to go and bomb like Romania, Switzerland, the UK of the 1850s? In order to get this? No, of course not. This is a question of these countries of how they deal with it. So what we can do is to keep an open society and say like gay Iranians, if you're being chased back home, then welcome here. Or we can talk about this. We can try to change the perceptions in countries bit by bit through rational conversations, but not by dropping bombs on them. It's horrible, and it's gay washing. It's gay washing war. It's just the military industrial complex trying to look cool and hip and whatnot. And you know what? It's only going to achieve the opposite of that. I have dear friends in Africa. And I remember very well this conversation with my Ugandan friends, who told me in their very lovely Ugandan way, saying like, "You, you Europeans, first you come to the continent, you bring us the book and tell us to hate the gays, and now you tell us to love the gays and burn the book. Can you please make up your mind?" And that's what we've been doing, for centuries. We impose our values and our conceptions of what a good society is, and we demand that the others live those too. And I am all for gay rights, but I will oppose bringing gay rights with bombs until I go to the grave. That's just not how we do it. We gays, we bring gay rights with parties, not with bombs. And if you cannot do it with a party, a good street party, then that's just it. That's the limit of where this approach can go.
I fully agree. And my biggest fear is that even in Romania, since we made progress in terms of women's rights, in terms of gay rights, but now I think there's a very important conservative backlash.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, they tend to associate the hardships that the NATO contribution from the budget and all the austerity measures, they tend to link it to this progressive agenda. And my fear is that the backlash would be to reject also austerity,
Yeah,
NATO, the European Union, and the very little progress that we made, especially in universities and in cities. It's for the elites so far and so forth, because
yeah,
Romania is a poor country and you cannot have the same type of representation and the same type of, the rights are not the same in the center and in the periphery, unfortunately, still. But my biggest fear is that it's going to be a huge backlash and we are going to go back to a very conservative agenda. Speaking the last question, you know, and it's related to this one. I was very happy to see a woman prime minister of Japan, but at the same time, it made me realize once again that this type of soup feminism, add feminists, add women and steer, there's an old saying in feminist, is not the best approach, since she started her career as a prime minister with very belligerent declarations aimed at China. So, would you like a feminist old man or a young woman as a prime minister, given the type of declarations she made?
yeah. I mean, I think it's quite simple. You want a prime minister who has a good and sane agenda for national and foreign policy, never mind the gender of the person, right? The matter, I mean, a fact is also that in Japan it still is a very male-dominated society. That they also interestingly know about that and actually have been trying to empower women and do policies. And these policies were, of course, done by men. I mean, by male prime minister, former long-term prime minister, conservative, and actually, kind of the not foster father, but the kind of the patron of Mrs. Takaichi, Mr. Shinzo Abe. He had a lot of policies that were supposed to that did empower women, including like changing, adding more daycare and so on, because you need to also give possibilities to women, of course, to have to participate in working life and giving incentives and so on. And there are, however, less women in executive positions and less women also in political positions. So she then got, of course, the achievement of being the first female prime minister. At the same time, she is more conservative than Mr. Abe, which is kind of this funny contradiction, right? Now you have, I'm pretty sure she will try to do something for women empowerment inside Japan, but whether overall her tenure is going to be good for the country or not is yet to be seen. Um, I I would say that it is still a good idea to try to create fairness in society, right? And how to do that is a difficult one, but thanks to the discussions we had, including people who I didn't like before and don't like anymore, but I must acknowledge them for that, like Jordan B. Peterson, who talked about, the difference between equality of outcome and equality of opportunity. I mean, this is and will remain to be an important discussion of how we structure society. But I do hope that we can do so in a rational way with emotions are always included, right? And emotions are good to a certain extent, but when they lead to these very toxic discussions where you have to choose sides, then we go into a very dark place. I must say, though, that this is a particularly, Euro-American way of doing debates, of getting toxic. The Japanese, they do it a bit differently. The Chinese too, and I think even also the Russians, like, a large part of the globe actually is fine with the idea that we have different shades of gray. And I hope that within those we can further the cause of good societies and do so if possible. I mean, for Christ's sake, do so please in peace. Let's not bomb the others. If we can agree on that, I'm a happy man.
And on this optimist note, thank you so much for coming to our show. And I hope this will be a valuable lesson for our viewers. Dear viewers, if you liked what you saw, share, subscribe to our channel, and help us spread the message of peace.
Thank you, Maria.